Hi everyone, the book I'm reviewing today is called Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. I am a fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza's work and his books. This is the second or third book of his that I've read. It's quite interesting. There are times when, even though he tries to give very practical examples, the read can become a bit intensive, but it's very fascinating. I love how he unpacks, and this is something that we can all relate with currently, is how stress impacts us, the makeup of our DNA and how our genes affect us. Is it possible to alter that? How emotions are stored and how they come out and how they impact our overall health. The psychology of the mind on overall well-being and creating abundance, etc. So he explains the theory, and he then proceeds with giving very practical examples, some easier to implement and others not so much. But I found it a very fascinating read, very enlightening. There are some items that make you sit down and reflect quite deeply, and others that take a bit more time. If you are a fan of his work, I would definitely recommend this book. If not, maybe one of his other books that can ease you into the topic. I'll read some extracts and then we can unpack and you can see if this is something you'd like to read. How stress hormones take over. From a scientific standpoint, living in stress is living in survival. When we perceive a stressful circumstance that threatens us in some way, one for which we cannot predict or control the outcome, a primitive nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system turns on, and the body mobilizes an enormous amount of energy in response to the stressor. Physiologically, the body is automatically tapping into the resources it will need to deal with the current danger. Circulation moves out of our rational forebrain and instead relay to our hindbrain, so we have less capacity to think creatively and instead rely more on our instinct to instantly react. All of us are built with dealing with short-term bursts of stress. When the event is over, the body normally returns to balance within hours, increasing its energy levels and restoring its vital resources. But when the stress doesn't end within hours, the body never returns to balance. In truth, no organism in nature can endure living in emergency mode for extended periods of time. Because of our large brains, human beings are capable of thinking about their problems, reliving past events, or even forecasting future worst-case situations, and thus turning on the cascade of stress chemicals by thought alone. We can knock our brains and bodies out of normal physiology just by thinking about an all too familiar past or trying to control an unpredictable future. And I think this is just it, right? All of us at some point have gone through this, and many of us continue to work and live under extended stressful situations, and that's not healthy. And how does it impact and affect us overall? I mean, your ability to think creatively, your ability to strategize, your ability to be able to see things as they are, not through a stress instant reaction lens. And he now talks about emotions. Emotions are the chemical consequence or feedback of past experiences. As our senses record incoming information from the environment, clusters of neurons organize into networks. When they freeze into a pattern, the brain makes a chemical that is then sent throughout the body. That chemical is called an emotion. We remember events better when we remember how they feel. The stronger the emotional quotient from any event, either good or bad, the stronger the change in our internal chemistry. When we notice a significant change inside of us, the brain pays attention to whoever or whatever is causing the change outside of us, and it takes a snapshot of the outer experience. That's called a memory. This is from a chapter called The Dark Night of the Soul. No one asked her about emotional and mental stress. They only treated the physical symptoms. But Anna's stress response was fully turned on and it couldn't turn off. It's amazing how this can happen to so many people. Because of a shock or trauma in their lives, they never get beyond those corresponding emotions and their health and their lives break down. He gives and he recalls an example of a lady, Anna, and a traumatic event that has occurred in her life, and how she was treated medically for her physical symptoms and not her emotional, and how everything deteriorated until she addressed that specific aspect of what was causing her stress and her emotions internally. It's a very powerful story, and it's very fascinating, and that's the part of this book that really sat with me, and where I reflected quite a lot. And I think the first step towards working through anything is first being consciously aware of what's going on. When you ask Anna about her past health problems, she will tell you that having those challenges was the best thing that ever happened to her. Think about it. What is the worst thing that ever happened to you turns out to be the best thing that has ever happened to you. She often tells me that she loves her present life, and I always respond, of course you do. You created your life every day by not getting up from your meditations until you were in love with that life. So now you get to love your life. It was through the course of a transformation that Anna had, in effect, became supernatural. She had overcome her identity, which was connected to her past, and she literally created a new healthy future, and her biology responded to a new mind. Anna is now the living example of truth and possibility, and if Anna healed herself, so can you. How your past becomes your future. Basically, it means your body is now on autopilot, running a series of programs, and over time, your body becomes the mind. You've done this routine so many times that your body automatically knows how to do certain things better than your brain or conscious mind. You just switch on the autopilot and go unconscious, which means you'll wake up the next morning and essentially do the same things all over again. In a very real sense, your body is dragging you into the same predictable future based on what you have repeatedly been doing in the same familiar past. You will think the same thoughts and then make the same choices that lead to the same behaviors that create the same experiences that produce the same emotions. Over time, you've created a set of hardwired neurological networks in the brain, and you have emotionally conditioned your body to live in the past, and the past becomes your future. I think this was a point that took me a long time to digest fully. I think this is something we can all relate to, right? That repetitive cycle. And there can be moments where you feel, I've done this before, I've lived through this, why do the same things keep happening? And it's exactly this, because you've hardwired your brain and conditioned your body to live in the past. And the past becomes your future, even though it's in different cycles. Making genetic changes. We used to think that genes created disease and that these were at the mercy of our DNA. So if many people in someone's family died of heart disease, we assumed that their chances of also developing heart disease would be pretty high. But we know now through the science of epigenetics that it's not the gene that creates disease, but the environment that programs our genes to create disease. And not just the external environment outside our body, cigarette smoke or pesticides, for example, but also the internal environment within our body, the environment outside our cells. I think that's quite powerful in terms of how we used to think of our DNA and genetically passed on disease and how disease actually happens. If you're miserable in your old job but manage to get a new one, you might be happy for a few weeks or even a few months, but if you have spent years conditioning your body to be addicted to misery, you would eventually return to that old emotion because your body would crave its chemical fix. Your outer environment may have changed, but your body will always believe its internal chemistry more than the external conditions, so it remains emotionally locked into your old state of being, still addicted to those old emotions. That's why I say you have to think greater than the way you feel to make any real lasting changes. How many of us are addicted to misery or addicted to ingratitude, addicted to being unhappy, addicted to being the victim? And that cycle will continuously repeat itself. And he actually unpacks this quite wonderfully through different aspects and how you can work yourself out of such despite how you're feeling. Living by the hormones of stress. In modern times, that's no longer the case. After just one phone call or email from our boss or a family member that elicits strong emotional reactions such as anger, frustration, fear, anxiety, sadness, guilt, suffering, or shame, we turn on the primitive fight-or-flight nervous system, causing us to react as if we were being chased by a predator. The same chemistry automatically stays switched on because the external threat never seems to go away. The truth is that so many of us spend the majority of our time in this state of heightened arousal. It becomes chronic. It's as though the predator is not out there in the wild making an occasional 2D appearance, but is instead living in the same cave as we are, a toxic coworker whose desk is right next to ours, for example. Such a chronic stress response is not adaptive, it's maladaptive. When we're living in survival mode and those hormones of stress like adrenaline and cortisol keep pumping through our body, we stay on high alert instead of returning to balance. And through all of this, I think he summarizes it quite well. In each of these cases, the thought you're thinking becomes the experience, and that's how you lock that into your system. He then goes into a chapter called Reconditioning the Body to a New Mind. Thoughts cause biochemical reactions in your brain that release chemical signals, and those chemical signals make the body feel exactly the way you were just thinking. Those feelings then cause you to generate more thoughts that make you feel the same way that you were just thinking. So your thoughts drive your feelings and your feelings drive your thoughts. And eventually this loop hardwires your brain into the same patterns, which conditions your body into the past. And because emotions are a record of past experiences, if you can't think greater than how you feel, this thinking-feeling loop keeps you anchored to your past and creates a constant state of being. This is how the body becomes the mind, or in time, how your thoughts run you and your own feelings own you. So ponder this. You know how easy it is to think a fearful or anxious thought about a future event that hasn't happened, and in your mind emotionally embrace this fictional outcome over and over. And you know how the more energy you feed the thought, the more you ruminate over other possible outcomes, and eventually those thoughts deliver you to a worst case scenario. It's the emotions that are driving those thoughts. You've conditioned your body to be the mind in fear and anxiety. If this continues over a long period of time, your body may have a panic attack. an automatic, spontaneous bodily function that your conscious mind can't control. But what if, instead of conditioning the body to the mind of fear and anxiety, you experienced sustained, elevated emotions and conditioned your body to the mind of love and coherence? Instead of being afraid and dreading that a panic attack is going to happen again, you'd get excited and look forward to the prospect of having an autonomic love attack. Dr. Joe Dispenza then goes on to unpack that in other practical ways. If this is a topic that fascinates you, I definitely recommend this read. If you've read the book, let me know. Let me know also what you're currently reading.